We've been hanging out in Florence a lot. Let's go outside of Florence. How about we go to Rome? We're going to go to the city of Rome, but we're going to look at a Florentine artist's work in the city of Rome. Okay? Now, Rome at this time serves as the seat of power for the Roman Catholic Church, the Christian church in the West, and the Pope lives here in the city of Rome. The city of Rome itself is the capital for the larger papal states. This territory here is not only ruled spiritually by the Pope, but also civically, their everyday lives. We're going to go to the city of Rome, and we're going to look at the decoration of a new chapel. It's called the Sistine Chapel. Now, in this photo, I've put a big red arrow here to call your attention to what we're supposed to be focusing in on. Because all of this, it's beautiful, it's glorious, but it's not there at the time of the early Italian Renaissance. This is new. This comes later. At the time that the Sistine Chapel is built, this is a massive construction site for the eventual production of this elaborate space. So I just need you to ignore it for now. Instead, focus in on this tiny chapel. Here's another view of it. The chapel is called Sistine Chapel because it is named after a pope who built it. The pope who paid for the building of it, his name is Pope Sixtus, S-I-X-T-U-S. So Pope Sixtus gets the name, or from the Pope Sixtus, we get the name Sixtine or Sistine Chapel. It was built in the 1470s, and it served as a private chapel or space of worship for the Pope and his immediate supporters, the cardinals. Here, this is a drawing of the chapel. Now, I'm showing you a drawing of it because, well, the Sistine Chapel, if you were to talk about it today, everybody would think about what's on the ceiling, which was a painting, or is a painting by Michelangelo. But that comes later in the Renaissance period, not now. When we're hanging out here in the Sistine Chapel, this is what it looked like. And if you see, the ceiling doesn't have Michelangelo. Instead, it has the very traditional, very basic, very common blue field with gold stars to represent heaven. And then the sides were painted by all of the most important and influential and prestigious artists of the Italian peninsula. That's what we'll be looking at today. So ignore the ceiling. The ceiling will come with Michelangelo later, but for now it's completed, it's done, it's beautiful, it's just gold stars in a blue field. The panels that are painted along the walls is what I want to call your attention to. Now, many famous early Italian Renaissance artists were called in by the Pope to paint panels or scenes from the from the New Testament, including the artist Ghirlandaio, who was Michelangelo's teacher, and two artworks by Botticelli. And the one that we'll be looking at is by the Florentine artist Perugino. And Perugino will be the teacher of Raphael, the last of our Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I know, right? So we're going to look at that, but here, just in case you're curious, when Michelangelo, much later, is asked to paint the ceiling over, or paint over the ceiling, that's what we get. But we're going to look here at this panel. The artist is Perugino. The artwork, the panel, is called Delivery of the Keys to St. Peter. And it is one panel in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. Ooh, before we get into it too much further, check out the bottom level the bottom register, it's painted to look like curtains. The paintings are, or the bottom register is painted to look like fabric curtains on a curtain rod, as if you could, like, pull them open. So there's this beautiful fake architecture and then these fake tapestries along the bottom level. But we're going to look here at this artwork in more detail. Here it is. What we see in Perugino's panel is called The Delivery of the Keys to St. Peter. This is depicting a story in which the authority of the church is given to St. Peter. It's outlined in the Gospel of Luke, the book of Luke, in which Peter acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah. And then Jesus says, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." And that is what we see here. So we see Peter, which I told you to recognize him, white hair, white beard, blue tunic, and orange mantle. And here he is literally receiving the keys to the gates of heaven from Jesus. Now that is the story. So what are all these other things? What are all these other things happening in this panel? This comes back to the characteristics and the elements or rules of Renaissance painting. So first of all, we have a balanced composition. The two main figures of the story are in the center, and then on either side, they are balanced by these groupings of both biblical figures in robes and these more contemporary Renaissance figures. Look at those guys, their short tunics and their tight leggings. In the background, we see more groups milling around, activating this space with games and conversations. And then we see in the back of the group, we see these big pieces of architecture. Do you remember the rule of architecture? Grand people deserve grand architecture. Important people need important architecture. This is a very important scene with two very important people. And here we see this very elaborate architecture. And we're going to look at it in more detail. Now, in terms of space or perspective, do you see it? Yeah, you do. See? So Perugino is showing us a lot of space. He puts all of the main figures in the front, and then he creates these extreme orthogonals that vanish at the horizon line, at the vanishing point behind this central structure or temple. See that? The lines, he's giving us the lines in the public square, the piazza. And those lines all lead into and beyond the temple itself. I say a temple because look at that. Pediment, columns. This type of space or this building could represent the Jewish temple, the synagogue, because after all, Jesus was a Jew. It also can connect us to principles of Renaissance architecture that are being explored and experimented with. On either side of the temple, here, look at this beautiful view of it. On either side of the temple are these two standing arches. Do you know what those are? Those arches are triumphal arches. Now, a triumphal arch, I've given you the term here. A triumphal arch is a monument. It's not meant to serve any kind of purpose as a building or a structure. Instead, it's an outcrop of rock that is speaking to the triumphs or the victories of a specific individual. And these were very popular during the ancient Roman Empire. They litter the entire empire. The one that I've chosen here is remarkably similar to what Perugino did because of its 3 arches in this greater stonework. This is the Arch of Constantine. The Roman Emperor Constantine had this erected in the city of Rome, and Constantine is also known as the first Christian Roman emperor. So Perugino is using a triumphal arch very similar to Constantine in his painting. Why use triumphal arches? Well, think about it. First of all, it's a Renaissance, of course, a rebirth of ancient Greek and Roman stuff, sure. But a triumphal arch is speaking of a triumph or a victory. Here, in this scene, what we have is the victory or the triumph of Christianity, the religion that comes from Jesus Christ and then is now manifested in the Sistine Chapel with the figure of the Pope. That's a triumph. And so the triumphal arches are there to symbolize the triumph of Christianity. Additionally, the Roman Christian Constantine makes this a very appropriate choice of arch. Well, Constantine became a Christian. This is the triumph of Christianity after all. But why 2? Why 2 triumphal arches? Why couldn't Perugino just put 1? Off balance. Putting 2 balances it out. Not only that, but if we were to look very closely, these 2 triumphal arches are identical, but simply seen at different perspectives. This was very popular, a very popular kind of technique in Renaissance painting, to have the same figure or the same art object, but present it in multiple viewpoints. And that is what Perugino is doing here. He's giving us the triumphal arch, but he's giving it in 2 different viewpoints. It was supposed to be some kind of, ooh, that's really clever. I love perspective. Thank you for giving me that one object, but in multiple perspectives in the same painting. It was a sign of a good artist, a good painting. So we have what other characteristics of the Renaissance? We have linear perspective. Do we have atmospheric perspective? Yeah, we do. Look at that. Those hazy blue mountains in the background. Ooh, look at how much space Perugino's giving us, how much depth. What about chiaroscuro? Yeah, look at the gorgeous attention to highlights, midtones, and shadows that we see. What about contrapposto? Yeah. Many of these figures are standing in contrapposto, counterbalance. So we see balance in the figures. We see balance in the composition as well. There is this very long horizontal band of figures in the foreground, in the front. And they are then balanced. Let me just give you a balanced line. It's going to drive me crazy. And then they are balanced by the vertical elements within the painting. So the entire composition is a balance of opposites. And then finally, let's look at gesture. So what I mean by gesture is hand movements, hand motions. Not only is the contrapposto displayed in the figures, but we see the story being told through the gestures. We see the humility, we see the grace, we see the piety, we see the reactions of those around them, their discussion, the theoretical or philosophical or theological discussions being had here through gesture. This is going to be playing a continued, this is going to continue to be a major part of characteristics in later Renaissance paintings. And Perugino is going to be an influential figure because he is the teacher of Raphael. And Raphael, in a later class, I'm going to talk about Raphael. Raphael is just Mr. Perfect Renaissance guy, and I'm going to give him a hard time about it. But I want you to see the makings of Raphael in his instructor, his master, Perugino. You know what? Perugino, like so many artists, he just couldn't resist to add himself to the scene. You want to see him? Where is he? There he is. That's Perugino right there.